Hare Krishna, dear devotees, welcome back to the daily readings of Srila Prabhupada's books, Our Life and Soul, the pathway to complete bliss and freedom, freedom from anxiety, freedom from suffering in this material world. Reading from the Srimad-Bhagavatam-mähätmya Stotram, which appears in Sri Krishna Lila Stava, a book by Srila Sanatana Goswami. His idea was to offer 108 obeisances to the pastimes of Krishna in Vrindavan. Very beautiful book for meditation and remembrance, written in simple vocative Sanskrit. And this is the 107th obeisance, just before the end of the book. Sanatana Goswami glorifies Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the source of all the Rasa Shastras, the literatures, describing the pastimes of Krishna and Krishna's personality. So it goes like this. Sarva Shastrabdi Piyusha, Sarva Vedaika Satpala, Sarva Siddhanta Ratnadya, Sarva Lokaika Drik Prada. O nectar from the ocean of all scriptures, singular fruit of all the Vedas, rich mine of the precious gems of all conclusive truths, you are the only giver of sight to all the worlds. Sarva Bhagavata Prana, Srimad Bhagavata Prabho, Kalidwandodita Ditya, Sri Krishna Parivartita. O life air of all the Supreme Lord's devotees, O Master Srimad Bhagavatam, you are the sun risen in the darkness of Kali. You are the exact image of Sri Krishna. Paramananda Pataya, Prema Varshakshadayate, Sarvada Savasevyaya, Sri Krishnaya Namostume. I bow down to you, who are supremely blissful to read. Your every syllable pours down a flood of prema. You can always be served by everyone. You are Sri Krishna himself. Madeka Bando Matsangin, Madguro Mad Mahadana, Mannishtadaga Mad Bhagya, Mad Ananda Namostute. My only friend, my constant companion, my spiritual master, my great wealth, my savior, my good fortune, my source of ecstasy, I bow down to you. Asadu sadutadayin, atini chochata koda, hanamuncha gadachin mam, premna rit kantayospuda. O bestower of saintliness to the unsaintly, O exalter of the most fallen, please never leave me. Always appear in my heart and my voice with pure love. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So Gopakumar has reached Brahmaloka, and by providence and the mercy of his spiritual master, who by the way is Krishna himself, and his mantra, he has attained the position of Brahma temporarily. So in Brahma's court, the personified Vedas are all there, and they sometimes have heavy philosophical discussions and even debates, because not all of the scriptures agree about everything, and that's one of the reasons why the Bhagavatam was spoken. Parikshit Maharaj was asking all the different sages that came from the different parts of the universe what I should do now. I'm just about to succumb to the curse of the Brahmin boy and leave my body. What should I do? And he got different opinions. But as soon as Shukadeva Goswami walked on the scene, he was just wandering around, naked, surrounded by women and children, teasing him. And everyone everyone except for Brahma and Narada and maybe a couple of other Vyasadeva, everyone else bowed down. 16 years old, just wandering around like a madman. But everyone could see, just by looking at him, this one knows. So they all put him on their seats. Maharaj Parikshit paid his obeisances, started to inquire, and the Bhagavatam came out. And everyone agreed. The sages of Naimisharanya, after they heard all of the different, did sacrifice and heard all the Puranas and all the Vedas, at the end, all they wanted to hear was the Srimad Bhagavatam. Okay. So there's this conversation going on in the court of Lord Brahma, which is occupied by Gopakumar temporarily. We're starting from text 167, chapter 2, part 2, Brhad Bhagavatamrta. Discerning the inner mood of the Puranas, Agamas, and other scriptures who had left the debate, I pacified them with tactful praise and brought them back to the assembly. Commentary. Gopakumar had noted the grave smiles on the faces of the Bhagavatam, Sattvata Siddhanta, and other scriptures who left the assembly. Those signs led him to believe that these few Shastras, among all the others, best understood the truth. With humility and adroit praise, he managed to bring them back. Text 168. From those scriptures, the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Sattvata Siddhanta, and other Agamas, and the foremost Shrutis, I respectfully asked about the truth of the matter, and they replied. Commentary. With great respect, Gopakumar asked the Bhagavatam and other devotional scriptures about the true nature of liberation. He also inquired why they had responded to the discussion the way they had, first by smiling silently, then by covering their ears and leaving the assembly. 169. The devotional scriptures, Sri Bhakti Shastrani Uchu. The devotional scriptures said, O dear one who have achieved the post of Brahma, this topic is most secret, is more secret than a rare treasure. But we shall explain it to you because your abundant good qualities inspire us to speak freely. Commentary. In texts 169 through 230, the Bhakti Shastras answer. Since Gopakumar holds the post of Lord Brahma, he is worthy of the privilege to hear such elevated topics. One might argue that the secrets of devotional service should not be freely divulged to anyone, not even the Lord of the entire universe, unless he is fully surrendered to the Supreme Lord and his devotees. But then Gopakumar's personal qualifications should be taken into account, especially his eagerness to engage in the Supreme Lord's service. Text 170. We who are dedicated to the Personality of Godhead's devotional service may sometimes discuss liberation, but only to encourage people to reject it completely. When we speak of liberation, we condemn it and everything that goes with it. Commentary. The Bhakti Shastras have no business promoting liberation, but sometimes they do describe it, because people generally cannot give up attachment to something unless scientifically taught why it is undesirable. When the Bhakti Shastris speak of liberation, they criticize attachment to liberation for its own sake, and attachment to jnana and other impersonal means of striving for liberation. Text 171. To describe the ultimate glories of devotional service, we may sometimes speak highly of moksha, liberation, but we do not intend to acclaim moksha, the final goal of spiritual discipline, because in moksha there is not even a trace of real happiness. Commentary. In some passages of the Bhakti Shastras, the joy found in liberation is described as being greater than that of happiness in material life. The Shastras provide this information to contrast the joy of liberation with the joy of pure devotional service, which is billions of times more intense. Other than the joy of liberation, nothing can be meaningfully compared with the joy of bhakti. Properly speaking, however, the concept of joy in liberation is only a theoretical creation of the impersonalists, as the Bhakti Shastras declare in this verse. In liberation, there is not even a trace of real happiness. Text 172. The so-called happiness of liberation may be compared to the happiness of not being sick, or the enjoyment of deep sleep. In fact, the very term liberation is a misnomer created by illusion, and it appeals only to the ignorant. Commentary. As the scriptures like to do, they here support their proposition with analogies. Simply being free from the pain of disease is not positive happiness, nor is there happiness in deep sleep, which is nothing but a condition of ignorance. One only imagines that in deep sleep one is happy, because in that deep sleep one is free for a while from the mind's flights of fancy and from dreams and other agitations. One thinks, I slept happily, unaware of anything. In the same way, one only imagines that there is happiness in liberation, a state of apparent voidness in which birth, death, and the other pains of material existence are not perceived. People praise liberation only because they are unaware of the facts. The very term liberation is a misnomer, as Lord Brahma states in the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam 10:14-26. The conception of material bondage and that of liberation are both signs of ignorance. They lie outside the scope of true knowledge. They cease to exist when one correctly knows that the pure spirit soul is distinct from matter and always fully conscious. Bondage and liberation then no longer have any meaning, just as day and night mean nothing for the sun. Text 173. From even the shadow of the Lord's names, if one somehow chants them but once, or if they merely enter the ears, liberation is easily attained. Commentary. If even after hearing how the previous verse defines liberation, one still wants to know the means to attain it, from the present statement one can learn that devotees of the personality of Godhead achieve liberation without separate endeavor, as a mere byproduct of the practice of bhakti. Furthermore, one's service to the holy names of the Lord need not even be pure. Simply namabhasa, the shadow of chanting the Lord's names, earns one liberation. Namabhas resembles the shadow of a real object in the world. One kind of namabhas is the unintentional uttering, in jest, contempt, or other moods of neglect, of sounds that contain the same syllables as Lord Vishnu's names. Chanting or hearing namabhasa even once, results in liberation. This is stated in the 6th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam 6.3.24. It should therefore be understood that one is easily relieved from all sinful reactions by chanting the holy name of the Lord and chanting of His qualities and activities. This is the only process recommended for relief from sinful reactions. Even if one chants the holy name of the Lord with improper pronunciation, he will achieve relief from material bondage if he chants without offenses. Ajamil, for example, was extremely sinful, but while dying, he merely chanted the holy name, and although calling his son, he achieved complete liberation because he remembered the name of Narayana. Also at the beginning of the history of Satyatapa, also in the beginning of the history of Satyatapa, Sri Varaha Purana 38:20 tells of a tiger that once approached a Brahmana who was busy chanting japa while standing in water. The tiger wanted to eat the Brahmana, but at that very moment the tiger was killed by a hunter. And because of hearing the names of the Supreme Lord from the mouth of the Brahmana, the tiger was liberated. Text 174. Liberation, please understand, is attractive to those whose discrimination is poor. This is evident even from the opinions of the same Vedas, Puranas, and other scriptures that the proponents of liberation accept as authorities. Commentary. In philosophical debates, opposing sides from different schools of thought unavoidably base their opinions on their own assumptions. Buddhists, for example, assume that everything is but momentary and thus unreal, while the logicians of the Gautama school assume that whatever has perceivable qualities is real. A debate is effective when each side, rather than fight over these assumptions, accepts, for the sake of argument, the assumptions of the other side and works out their own arguments from that starting point. It is in this sense that the Bhakti Shastras accept the scriptural statements yogis cite in support of their conviction that impersonal liberation is the final goal of life. Text 175. Moksha, liberation, is the removal of all misery, or the stopping of illusory activities, or the self-realization that comes from abandoning the false identities created by Maya. Commentary. These three alternative definitions of moksha, taken from various shastras, are adhered to by those who strive for liberation. The logicians of Gautama's Nyaya school hold that liberation is the removal of all kinds of misery, which they count as 21. As the followers of Gautama say, Atyantiki dukha nivritya muktihi. Liberation is the complete stoppage of suffering. A section of the Vedanta school says that liberation is the ceasing of illusion, and thus of activity, from which suffering comes about. And another party of impersonal Vedantists, the illusionists, Vivartavadis, define liberation as rejecting the false identity produced by the power of illusion, and thus realizing oneself to be one with Brahman. The Vivartavadis further describe the false identity of the illusion soul in terms of dualities and the cycle of life and death. These impersonalists sometimes cite Srimad Bhagavatam 2.10.6 as the source of their definition. Muktir hit vanyata rupam sarupina vivastitihi. Liberation means to give up other identities and assume one's true, essential identity. Text 176. The happiness that arises from directly perceiving the true identity of the jiva soul, the entity composed of eternity, knowledge, and bliss, is actually meager. Commentary. The moksha, or liberation, conceived in the first two ideas cited above, moksha as the end of misery, or as the end of the causes of misery, affords no positive happiness. Furthermore, the happiness of self-realization presumed in the third theory of moksha, that of vivarta, is meager, as the Bhakti Shastras in texts 176 through 196 now set out to prove. Compared to the bliss of performing pure devotional service and realizing the lotus feet of the personality of Godhead, who embodies all the perfections of Brahman, realizing the identity of the jiva soul brings very little happiness. In fact, this so-called happiness of self-realization is nothing more than the negation of suffering. The scriptures refer to it as happiness only as a concession to the foolish. But at least the happiness of perceiving the jiva soul serves as a standard of comparison by which to think of the joy of pure devotional service to the Supreme Lord. So this is how Gopakumar is getting his spiritual education. All the different places he goes, he's learning different things about worship, about different forms of the Lord, and now he's hearing the philosophy straight from the personified Vedas. Text 177. That entity, the reality of pure self, is called Brahman. It is devoid of qualities, free from attachment, unchanging, and inactive. Commentary. The impersonalists might now suggest that in contrast to the small happiness of realizing the minute jiva, the relish of perceiving the impersonal supreme in liberation is unlimited. However, the Bhakti Shastras here point out that the Vivartavadi's own definition of the Supreme leaves little room in Brahman realization for happiness. According to them, Brahman is devoid of qualities such as compassion. It has no attachment to anything or anyone, including the pure Vaishnavas. It understands no changes, such as the transformations of a heart melting in the ecstasy of love, such as the transformations of a heart melting in the ecstasy of love, and displays none of the dynamic varieties of opulence and sweetness known by the Supreme Lord in his personal form. It is also inactive, which implies that it has no wonderful, all-attractive pastimes. Thus, the happiness of realizing Brahman cannot transcend the limits of impersonalism. Text 178. But the personality of Godhead is the supreme Brahman, the Supersoul, the absolute controller of everything. His body is the concentrated essence of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. He is an ocean of superlative qualities. Commentary. Substantial happiness is not to be found in the impersonal conception of the Supreme, but rather in pure devotional service to the personality of Godhead. He is the complete, absolute truth, Param Brahma. He is also the Supreme Soul, the indwelling controller, who regulates everyone's consciousness. As such, he is the ultimate controller of everything, the ruler of even Brahma and all the other demigods. As the Lord of Vaikuntha, he is the most concentrated manifestation of eternity, knowledge, and bliss, which constitute his transcendental body. He is an ocean, steady, deep, and infinitely wide, of countless, inconceivable, and amazing perfections. When the Bhakti Shastras refer to the full personal concept of the Absolute Truth, the term normally used is Parabrahman or Param Brahma, as in Bhagavad Gita 10:12, Param Brahma, Param Dhamma, Pavitram Paramam Bhavan. You are the Supreme Brahman, the Supreme Abode, the Supreme Purifier. When the spiritual reality is indicated in a more generic sense, it is usually called simply Brahman, as again in Bhagavad Gita 14:27. Brahmano hi pratishtaham. I am the foundation of the Absolute. Srimad Bhagavatam 10:87:1 also states, how can the Vedas directly describe the Supreme Absolute Truth who cannot be described in words? O Brahmana, the Vedas are limited to describing the qualities of material nature. But the Supreme is devoid of those qualities, being transcendental to all material manifestations and their causes. When the adjective param is seen with the term Brahma, it may occasionally be intended to distinguish Brahma, the Supreme Truth, from Vedic sound, which is also called Brahma. Text 179. Contrary natures, like having qualities and having no qualities, conjoin in him. Since impersonal Brahman is an infinite opulence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the difference between him and Brahman is well established. Commentary. As rivers merge into an ocean, many opposite qualities converge in the Supreme Person. The word Adi, after Sagunaiva and Agunatva, indicates more opposites: detachment and association, changelessness and change, inactivity and endeavor, oneness and multiplicity, non-duality and specific qualities. Conceived as impersonal Brahman, the Supreme is devoid of qualities and other dualities. Conceived as Paramatma and Parameshwara, the Supreme displays characteristics such as having relationships with other living beings, possessing wonderful qualities, and so on. Thus, in truth, the Supreme is full of qualities, many of them apparently contradictory. Shastra may sometimes say that the Supreme cannot be described in words and that he has no name, but the literal construction of these statements is refuted by the Vasudevadhyatma. Because his qualities are not well known, he is said to have no name. And because his form is not material, he is said to have no form. Mayavadis argue that the personality of Godhead may have qualities, but as products of Maya, those qualities are illusory. Thus, they want to reconcile his having qualities with their idea of reality, that the Supreme actually has no qualities. In fact, however, the supreme powers of the Absolute Truth are eternal and real, not illusory, like the material creation. And therefore, when the personal feature of the Supreme, Bhagavan, is said to be nirguna, like Brahman, the sense is different, namely that Bhagavan transcends all material qualities. At the same time, like the material world, he has many different qualities, and so he is also said to be saguna. This seems contradictory, but it is possible by his inconceivable, amazing potencies. The Supreme Person is indeed Mahimarnava, the ocean in which all perfections converge. This is confirmed in many shastras. In the words of the Moksha Dharma, Mahabharat, Shanti Parva, 335, 10, and 11. O ruler of the people, whatever you see in this world is in connection with the material bodies of the living entities. Whatever you see composed of the 5 elements born from the intelligence of the Supreme Lord, know all that to be the Supreme Lord Himself, both possessing qualities and having none. He is the ultimate element of all creation, the Supreme Master, the body of the universe, Lord Narayana. Try to understand Him to be the inner self of all creatures. In the Kurma Purana, He is neither large nor infinitesimal, yet He is larger and smaller than everything else. He is said to be devoid of color, yet He is dark blue, and the corners of His eyes are reddish. By the play of His personal powers, the Supreme Lord is known by contradictory designations. Yet He is the Supreme, and faults should never be ascribed to Him. In Him all contrary qualities combine. And in the Vishnu Dharmottara Purana, all qualities joined together in the Supreme Person by virtue of His transcendental powers. Yet no faults ever enter Him, for He is the Absolute. Some persons who are not truly learned say that good qualities and faults exist in the Supreme Lord by the force of Maya. But in Him there is no Maya, nor any agent who could possess Maya. How then could He have illusory good qualities and faults that Maya could produce? The opulences of the Supreme Lord are not, therefore, generated by the force of illusion. The Lord transcends Maya, and so He is known as the Supreme. All this will be more elaborately explained later on. Although impersonal Brahman and the personality of Godhead are but different conceptions of the same absolute truth, some think otherwise. They think that Brahman, the Lord's formless aspect, worshipped by yogis, is one entity, and that His form, possessing personal qualities and worshipped by His devotees, is a different entity. But although the Mayavadis think that Saguna Brahman is not as real as Nirguna Brahman, they still have to admit that the Saguna aspect of the Supreme is the concentrated eternal essence of pure existence, Shuddha Sattva. Therefore, even in their opinion, the Saguna form of the Lord is superior to everything else that has form. That personal form is realized by the Lord's unalloyed devotees, but remains invisible to persons striving to realize impersonal Brahman. In addition, the personal aspect of the Supreme has special unique excellences, such as His distinguishing the topmost ecstasy of prema, such as His distributing the topmost ecstasy of prema. How the Lord selectively reveals himself is shown in a narrative of the Sri-Narayaniya, of the Moksha Dharma, where Uparichara Vasu performs a sacrifice in which he, but not Brihaspati and others, is able to see the personality of Godhead, accepting his share of the offerings. Another vivid example, let's read that again, this is deep. I'm reading this paragraph again. That personal form is realized by the Lord's unalloyed devotees, but remains invisible to persons striving to realize impersonal Brahman. In addition, the personal aspect of the Supreme has special unique excellences, such as his distributing the topmost ecstasy of prema. How the Lord selectively reveals himself is shown in a narrative of the Sri-Narayaniya, of the Moksha Dharma, where Upacharita Vasu performs a sacrifice in which he, but not Brihaspati and others, is able to see the personality of Godhead, accepting his share of the offerings. Another vivid example appears in the history of Brahma's sons, Ekata, Dvita, and Trita, all great yogis who went to Shvetadvip to see the Supreme Lord. Even after intense endeavor, they were unable to have his audience. But although Sri Sanaka and his brothers were constantly perceiving Brahman and were the most elevated of self-contented sages, when they visited Sri Vaikuntha, they did see the personality of Godhead, and the ecstasy they felt was so powerful that various transformations became manifest in them. This same incident is described in the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam 3:15-43. When the breeze carrying the aroma of tulsi leaves from the toes of the lotus feet of the personality of Godhead entered the nostrils of those sages, they experienced a change both in body and in mind, even though they were attached to the impersonal Brahman understanding. The conclusion is that the Supreme's features of Brahman and the Jiva soul are two of the personality of Godhead's opulent expansions, as many authoritative sources confirm. For example, according to one saying by saintly devotees, Parat Param Brahma Chate Vibhutaya, the Supreme Truth, Brahman, is also one of your vibhutis, O Lord. In Bhagavad Gita 10:20, Sri Krishna includes the soul as one of his vibhutis. Aham Atma Gudakesha Sarvabhutashayastitaha. O conqueror of sleep, I am the soul situated in the hearts of all living beings. Sri Brahma Samhita 5:40 also states, I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is endowed with great power. The glowing effulgence of his transcendental form is the impersonal Brahman, which is absolute, complete, and unlimited, and which displays the varieties of countless planets with their different opulences in millions and millions of universes. In other words, Brahman is the Supreme Person's partial expansion. And as stated elsewhere, those who blaspheme the Supreme Soul go to darkness that has no beginning or end. The Jiva soul is subordinate, bound, weak, full of faults, and absorbed in very insignificant awareness and enjoyment. But the Supreme has just the opposite qualities. What wickedness does one not commit by saying that the Jiva soul and the Supreme Soul are the same? When fools and rascals read the scriptural statements that describe the oneness of the soul and the super soul, they become bewildered. These statements inspire them to tell one another, I am you, and you are me, my own self. But actually the Supreme Person is the indwelling regulator, the soul within everyone. And so he is different from the individual soul. In this way, demons are bewildered by statements intended to confuse them. And that bewilderment is pleasing to the demigods and to the Supreme Lord himself. For thinking that the soul and super soul are one and the same, the demons go to the hell called Mahadatamas. Mahadatamas. So I'm going to stop here. It's 8 o'clock exactly. This is a very in-depth and wonderful analysis of the difference between the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his personal conception and whatever other conceptions people think the Supreme is. And it's very important that we understand at least the difference, because otherwise we will not be able to perceive that the individual soul, the Atma, and the super soul, the Paramatma, what to speak of the source of the Paramatma, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, are different from one another. Hare Krishna. All glories to the personified Vedas. So this is like the 87th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam. In many ways you can see how this Brhad Bhagavatamrta is actually an essential, an essential summary of the Bhagavatam. It's got all the concepts and everything, but it put it in a different way. Okay, that's it for tonight, the readings. Now let's have some reflections and conversation and comments. Hare Krishna.
From Radha Madan Mohan.
From Radha Madan Mohan, okay.
Hare Krishna, dear Maharaj, and all devotee friends. Jai Brhad Bhagavatamrta and Jai Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna.
Rati Manjari, Jai Guru Maharaj.
Jai Rati.
Sudevi Dasi, Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna, Sudevi Dasi.
Braj Vralabha, Hare Krishna Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisance.
Hare Krishna Braja.
Ogres to Srila Prabhupada. I feel like I am ringside at a first-class boxing match.
It's a nice realization.
My observation is the points...
Or a ping-pong match.
Observation is the points about moksha being a cessation of certain sufferings is not really enough to satisfy the soul.
Yes.
Bhakti gives us the Krishna connection that makes us happy.
Yes.
Never thought of it like that before.
Yes. Because the impersonal happiness is just a negation of the misery. There's no actual direct happiness. It's an indirect happiness of cessation or the stopping of misery. But there's no positive happiness, no positive activity, no positive bliss.
Krishnangi Mulder said, Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you.
Who?
Krishnangi.
Oh, Krishnangi.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Maha devotees, I thank you very much. This is deep philosophical understanding, verses and commentaries, but please just keep hearing it, Keep hearing it. Everything will be revealed through this book. Everything. Okay, Sri Brhad something else, sorry.
From Rati Manjari.
Yes, Rati.
Dear Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. In the purport of text 179, there is a statement which puzzled me and which I would like to get your clarification on. I quote, in Bhagavad Gita 10.20, Sri Krishna includes the soul as one of his vibhutis. Ahamatma gudakesha sarvabhutasya stitaha. O conqueror of sleep, I am the soul situated in the hearts of all living beings. End quote. I couldn't recall this translation and I looked it up. In the Bhagavad Gita, Srila Prabhupada translated this verse as, I am the super soul Arjuna seated in the hearts of all living entities.
Well, the word Atma can be translated either way. And sometimes in the context, the same verse will be translated a little bit differently in order to fit into the context. So please don't be bewildered. What it means is that the Atma, or the soul, and the super soul are both energies or both emanations from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They are different. The whole point of this philosophical conversation is to understand that the Atma is spiritual, but it is infinitesimal, and the Paramatma is infinite. They're both persons. They're both sentient beings. So sometimes the Atma is referred to when it talks about the soul within the body. Sometimes the Paramatma is referred to as the Supreme Soul within the body. But there are two souls in the body, and they are different in quantity. But in quality, they're the same. They're of the same nature. Therefore, sometimes you'll hear the description of going back to Godhead is attaining the same nature as Krishna. That means the bodies of the souls in the spiritual world and the bodies of Krishna and the body of Krishna are of the same nature, the same qualities. Those qualities are eternity, knowledge, and bliss. In the material world, there's goodness, passion, and ignorance. And the forms that are created by that goodness, passion, and ignorance cover the soul and cause the soul to think of himself as different from Krishna in the sense of being separate from Krishna. But in the spiritual world, the forms are not made of goodness, passion, and ignorance. They're made of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. Both the soul and the Supreme Soul are made of that same spiritual Shuddha Sattva, as is everything else in the spiritual world. So this idea that the Atma is a vibhuti of Krishna and that the Super Soul is a vibhuti of Krishna are both correct. They may seem at the first glance to be contradictory or different, but they are both vibhutis of Krishna. Hare Krishna.
This is from Anadi Kishore.
Anadi Kishore. Haribo.
Thank you very much for the reading, Maharaj. The end of the last purport reminded me of a Sankirtan story relayed by one of my friends here in New Zealand. I met a stubborn impersonalist who was absolutely determined that he was him, and they were debating for a short time about the value of Prabhupada's books. He was also determined not to give a donation. At some stage, my friend said, I am you, and I would like you to give a donation. To which the man conceded and gave something before going away.
Oh, that's a good one. I think it was maybe it was Guru Das, or one of the first devotees in Vrindavan. They saw this impersonalist, and he was sitting with a bunch of people, spouting off, impersonal philosophy. And it was winter, it was very cold, and he was wearing this nice chadar. And he said, "You see this thread of this chadar? It is the same as the chadar." So Guru Das thought, oh. So he came up to him, and he said, "So this thread is the same as the chadar?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "Therefore, I need the chadar, I'll give you the thread." And he was forced. He was forced because everybody was watching him. And he gave him the chadar. And then afterwards, when it was really cold, and he came up to, after everybody kind of dispersed, he came up to Garuda, and he was frizzing, shattering. He said, "By the way, can I have back my chadar?" And he said, "No, you said the chadar is different than the thread, so you have the thread. It's the same, right?" He got really angry. Hare Krishna.
Bhakti said, "It felt interesting to be considered as one of Krishna's vibhutis, a tiny mind shift."
Well, it's there in the Gita. It's actually there. Hare Krishna. All right, thank you so much. Sri Brhad Bhagavatamrta ki jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bo. So please come tomorrow night. Same time, same place, same topic. We will be here as usual, tasting the creme de la creme, 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 de la creme of the Vedas. Hare Krishna. See you tomorrow. Hari Bol.